It was nearly 2 a.m. when the soft hum of the city hospital's fluorescent lights blended with the occasional echo of hurried footsteps and distant beeping monitors. In room 304, under the harsh glare of the overhead lamp, Nina Bennett sat on the edge of a stiff hospital bed, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the thin blanket draped over her legs. She was 34 weeks pregnant, her first child, a baby girl she and her husband, Malcolm, had prayed for every single night since they found out. But tonight, there was no joy in Nina's eyes. Instead, there was exhaustion, worry, and a quiet storm brewing just beneath the surface. The contractions had started earlier than they should have, sharp, unexpected, and frightening. Malcolm had rushed her here the moment her knees buckled in their tiny living room. He was now down the hall, trying to complete the barrage of paperwork the nurse had shoved into his hands the moment they arrived. Nina shifted, wincing as another contraction seized her. She pressed her hand firmly against her belly, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's got you." Just then, the door swung open with an abruptness that made her flinch. A tall man in a crisp white coat strode in, eyes locked on a tablet, not even glancing up at her. His name badge read, Dr. Ethan Harrow, OB-GYN. His hair was immaculately combed, and every movement about him seemed rehearsed, robotic. He didn't greet her. He didn't introduce himself. He just sighed loudly, as if he were already annoyed by her very presence. "So," he muttered, flipping through her chart, "what exactly is the issue this time?" Nina blinked, caught off guard by his tone. I'm having contractions. I think I might be going into preterm labor." Dr. Harrow scoffed. "Preterm labor? Right." He finally looked up, his cold gray eyes scanning her from head to toe. There was no warmth there. Just a flicker of something ugly, contempt. "You people always think every cramp is an emergency," he said under his breath, but loud enough for Nina to hear every syllable. Nina felt her breath catch. She wasn't naive, she'd heard that tone before, seen that look in certain grocery store aisles, at a bank teller's window. But here where her baby's life could be on the line. She shifted uncomfortably. "Doctor, please, the contractions are about 5 minutes apart. I don't feel right. Can you check?" Dr. Harrow clicked his tongue and scribbled something on his tablet. "We'll run some tests when I have time. For now, just lie back and try not to overreact. Stress only makes it worse." He turned to leave, but Nina, fueled by the fear clawing at her chest, found her voice. "Please, my baby." He spun on his heel, eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Bennett, don't tell me how to do my job. If you people learned to take better care of yourselves, maybe we wouldn't have half these false alarms clogging up my ER at 2 a.m. Nina's mouth fell open. The words sank into her like a blade. "You people." The phrase rattled around the room like an insult shouted through a megaphone. Before she could muster a reply, Dr. Harrow was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Nina stared at the sterile white walls, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over her cheeks. Her heart pounded, not just from the pain in her belly but from the sting of humiliation, the fear that maybe she was overreacting, maybe she shouldn't have come at all. She pressed her palms into her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Her baby squirmed inside her, as if trying to remind her, "Stay strong, Mama." Minutes later, the door opened again, softer this time. Malcolm slipped in, his brow furrowed with worry, a stack of paperwork still in his hands. He saw the look on her face immediately. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside her. "Nina. What happened? Are you okay? What did the doctor say?" She couldn't stop the tear that slid down her cheek then. "He said, nothing. He barely looked at me. He said I'm overreacting. He said, you people." Her voice cracked on the last words. Malcolm's jaw tensed. He set the papers aside and took her hands in his, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Hey. Look at me. You are not overreacting. You hear me? You did the right thing coming here. Nina nodded weakly, but her eyes drifted toward the door, half expecting the doctor to barge back in with another insult. Malcolm stood. A calm, icy resolve settled over his features. He pulled out his phone and tapped out a message with quick, precise movements. Nina knew that look, the calm before the storm. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. Malcolm leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "Don't worry, baby. I'm going to make this right. No one talks to my wife like that. Not tonight. Not ever." He kissed her forehead and straightened up, his eyes flashing with something fierce, protective, and utterly unshakable. Outside, the hallway buzzed with nurses and orderlies. Malcolm moved through them like a shadow with a mission. He stopped by the nurses' station where a young nurse, Erica, sat typing up charts. "Excuse me," Malcolm said, his voice even but firm. "Where can I find Dr. Harrow?" Erica looked up, startled. He's probably in the staff lounge, down that hall." "Thank you." Malcolm didn't wait for more. He turned on his heel and disappeared down the hall, his mind already racing through everything he knew, everything he was. Dr. Harrow had no idea who he'd just belittled. He had no clue what was about to crash down on his carefully insulated world. In room 304, Nina lay back against the pillow, one hand on her belly, her heart still pounding with dread and a flicker of hope. She didn't know exactly what her husband was going to do. But she knew one thing for certain, karma was on its way. Malcolm's footsteps echoed down the sterile hallway as he headed for the staff lounge. He could feel the eyes of a few nurses on him, some curious, some wary. It didn't matter. All that mattered was Nina and the baby she carried. He would not stand by and watch them be disrespected, not by a man hiding behind a white coat and a title. At the end of the hallway, a frosted glass door marked "Staff Only" stood ajar. Malcolm paused just outside, listening. Inside, Dr. Ethan Harrow lounged on a cheap faux leather couch, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand, his phone in the other. He was chuckling at something on the screen, probably some meme or gossip, oblivious to the pain festering just a few doors down. Malcolm stepped inside, his presence filling the cramped room instantly. Dr. Harrow glanced up, an annoyed flicker passing over his face when he realized it wasn't another doctor or nurse. "Yes," Harrow said sharply, not bothering to sit up straighter. "Can I help you?" Malcolm closed the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow made the room feel even smaller. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on the doctor's cold, dismissive gaze. "You can start by apologizing to my wife," Malcolm said, his tone even, almost polite, but beneath it, something thundered. Dr. Harrow snorted. He set his coffee down with an exaggerated sigh. "Your wife? Let me guess, she's overreacting about a routine pregnancy cramp." "Look, sir," he practically spat the word, "sir," but with no respect behind it. "I have actual emergencies to deal with. If she can't handle mild discomfort." Malcolm stepped forward, close enough that Harrow leaned back, suddenly realizing that maybe this wasn't going to be a quick dismissal. "Listen to me carefully, doctor," Malcolm said, his voice low. "You will never speak to my wife that way again. You will check her properly. You will treat her with respect. And when this is over, you will answer for what you said tonight." Dr. Harrow's lips curled into a smirk. "Answer? To who? You think I'm afraid of some angry husband? Take it up with the administration if you want, you people always think." There it was again. Those two words. Malcolm felt them hit him like poison, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a calm, chilling smile that made the doctor's smirk falter. "Oh, I plan to," Malcolm said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he produced an ID card, simple but powerful, Malcolm Bennett, Deputy Chief Counsel for the State Health Oversight Board. Dr. Harrow's eyes flicked to the card, confusion knitting his brow. But as he read the bold lettering, the color drained from his face. Malcolm held the card steady, letting the reality sink in. I know exactly how this hospital operates. I know the board. I know your chief of medicine, your HR director, your malpractice insurance providers. And you just handed me everything I need to tear this place apart if I have to. Dr. Harrow swallowed. He opened his mouth, but Malcolm raised a finger, not yet. You see, Doctor, Malcolm continued, his tone still calm but his eyes sharp enough to cut glass, you didn't just insult my wife tonight. You humiliated her when she was vulnerable. You endangered my unborn child by refusing care because of your prejudice. That's not just unethical, it's actionable. And believe me, I will act. The door creaked open suddenly. Erica, the nurse from earlier, peeked in, wide-eyed. She'd heard enough to piece together what was happening. Mr. Bennett, she said carefully, your wife's contractions are closer together now. She needs to be checked immediately. Malcolm didn't even look at Harrow. He brushed past him, but his final words dropped like a gavel. You're going to check her. Properly. And you're going to treat her like the mother of my child. Not like some inconvenience you can brush aside. Or you won't just lose your license, you'll watch the whole world know exactly who you are. He stepped out, leaving Harrow frozen, staring at the ID card Malcolm had left on the table, like a loaded gun that could go off at any second. Back in room 304, Nina was breathing through another contraction when Malcolm returned. She searched his face for answers, for reassurance. It's okay, Malcolm whispered as he kissed her forehead. He's coming back. He's going to do his job now. And when you're safe, he's going to wish he'd never opened his mouth tonight. Minutes later, the door opened again. Dr. Harrow entered, shoulders stiff, eyes cast downward. Without a word, he washed his hands, pulled on fresh gloves, and gently approached Nina's bedside. I'm going to check your dilation and the baby's position, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Nina looked at Malcolm, who stood at her side, her hand wrapped tightly in his. She could feel the shift in the air, the humiliation replaced with fear. But not hers. His. For the next several minutes, Dr. Harrow worked quietly, his movements efficient but no longer cold. He spoke softly, explained what he was doing, answered Nina's questions without a trace of his earlier contempt. It wasn't kindness, it was survival. When he was done, he cleared his throat. You're 4 centimeters dilated. Early labor. We'll admit you and start you on medication to help protect the baby's lungs. Nina just nodded, exhausted but relieved. She felt Malcolm squeeze her hand, strong, warm, unwavering. Outside the room, word of what happened spread fast. Erica, the young nurse, whispered to the charge nurse. A resident overheard. By dawn, the entire maternity ward was buzzing. Malcolm made a few quiet calls. To the hospital director. To the board chairman. By the time the sun rose, Dr. Ethan Harrow's name was already under review. His file would be examined for complaints. And there were bound to be more. There always were. Hours later, as Nina drifted off to sleep with monitors beeping steadily beside her, Malcolm sat by her side, his fingers tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, the steady beat of the tiny heart inside her, their daughter. He thought about the system, how it let people like Harrow hide behind walls of power and silence. Not anymore. Not here. Not tonight. In the hallway, a few nurses passed by the window, stealing glances at the man who had brought the storm crashing down on a doctor who thought he was untouchable. Karma, Malcolm thought as he looked at his wife, was never late. Sometimes, it only needed 15 minutes, and a husband who refused to stay silent, the hours that followed felt both endless and fleeting. Nina's contractions grew stronger, her breaths shallow and quick between moments of rest. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting IVs, whispering quiet encouragements that felt warmer than the sterile room should allow. Malcolm stayed at Nina's side the entire time, never once letting go of her hand. Between contractions, she would drift in and out of exhausted sleep, waking just long enough to find his eyes and anchor herself there, in his calm, steady presence. Dr. Harrow came in and out too, but now he was silent, mechanical, a shadow of the arrogant man who had once mocked her pain. He spoke only when necessary, eyes never lingering too long. Once, as he adjusted the fetal monitor, his gaze met Malcolm's for a brief second. Whatever pride he once carried was gone, replaced by a hollow fear of what waited for him outside these four walls. Around dawn, Nina's pain reached its crescendo, and then, just as quickly, the room transformed. Two nurses prepped trays, the lights dimmed but focused on the bed, and the muffled beeping of the baby's heart filled the silence between her strained breaths. Malcolm leaned in, brushing a damp curl from Nina's forehead. "You're almost there, baby. Just a little more. You got this." She squeezed his hand so tightly he thought his bones might crack, but he welcomed the pain. It was real, it was proof that she was fighting, that their daughter was almost here. Dr. Harrow gave quiet instructions, his voice flat and low. But when Nina needed reassurance, it wasn't him she looked to, it was the nurse, Erica, who stood by her side, whispering encouragements, her hand on Nina's shoulder like a promise that she wasn't alone. And then, a cry. A sharp, tiny, perfect cry that cut through the exhaustion, the fear, the lingering sting of humiliation, a cry that filled the room with something holy. Nina collapsed back, tears streaming down her cheeks, her chest rising and falling in short, stunned breaths. Malcolm stared in awe as Erica lifted the tiny, squirming bundle and laid her on Nina's chest. For a moment, the world stood still. It didn't matter that the night had been cruel. It didn't matter that hate had tried to crawl into that room. All that mattered was this, their daughter, warm and alive, her heartbeat strong against Nina's skin. An hour later. The baby, whom they named Lena, slept in a clear bassinet by Nina's bed. Malcolm stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, precise, the same tone he used when negotiating settlements that decided the fate of entire hospital systems. "Thank you for meeting with me so quickly," he said into the receiver. "I'm sending over the formal complaint with supporting statements from staff. And, yes, you'll see the footage from the hallway cameras. The board will want a meeting today. He's not fit to wear that coat another day longer." He ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket as he turned to face his family. Nina watched him, a tired smile pulling at the corners of her lips. She knew that look, the storm was still rolling, but its aim was true. A soft knock came at the door. It was Erica again, this time with a timid smile and a fresh chart in her hands. "Mrs. Bennett?" she asked gently. "There's some paperwork, but don't worry, I'll help you with it when you're ready. And, congratulations." Her eyes flicked to the baby, her voice catching. "She's beautiful." "Thank you, Erica," Nina said softly. "For everything." Before the nurse could reply, Dr. Harrow appeared behind her, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow. He lingered at the threshold, an unwelcome ghost. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett, I wanted to say." Malcolm stepped forward, cutting him off with a single, raised hand. "Save it." Harrow flinched, looking down at the floor. He opened his mouth again, but the words wouldn't come. In the silence, the baby let out a soft sigh, a sound more powerful than any apology the doctor could have offered. Erica gently took the chart from Harrow's hand, dismissing him without a word. It was done. Outside the room, the whispers spread through the hospital like a cleansing fire. Nurses spoke in hushed tones about what they'd seen, the lawyer husband, the fearless wife, the once untouchable doctor who now sat in an empty lounge, staring at the complaint that would end his career. By the next day, the story was more than just rumor, it was a statement. Staff who'd once been too afraid to speak about Dr. Harrow's behavior came forward, telling their own stories. Racist comments, dismissive treatment, complaints buried under piles of paperwork. Now, the hospital had no choice but to face it all. And with Malcolm's name attached, the board couldn't hide it this time. The local paper picked up the whispers. By the end of the week, Dr. Ethan Harrow was no longer listed on the hospital's website. His office door was closed, his nameplate gone. Back at home, a week later, Nina sat by the window, cradling baby Lena against her chest. Malcolm watched them from the doorway, coffee in hand, exhaustion clinging to his eyes, but underneath it, a quiet satisfaction. Nina looked up, catching his gaze. "You did that," she said softly. "You made sure he couldn't do this to anyone else." Malcolm walked over, crouching beside her chair. He brushed a finger against Lena's tiny hand, which curled instinctively around it. "No," he said. "We did. You stood your ground. You protected her long before I could." Nina leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Outside, the world moved on, cars passing, birds calling from the trees, but here, in this small moment, justice and new life coexisted. They both knew this wasn't the end. The world was still full of people like Dr. Harrow. People who thought their titles made them untouchable, their prejudice invisible. But they also knew that sometimes, all it took was one voice refusing to be silenced, one husband refusing to bow his head, one mother refusing to doubt herself, to spark change. And for tonight, that was enough. Nina looked down at Lena, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. "She'll never know that hate," she whispered. "Not if we have anything to say about it." Malcolm pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand resting over both hers and Lena's. "She won't."